Jiggity jig, of course implied. On Pan's transparent form we ride. The hider seeks, the seeker hides, while squeamish streamers feast their eyes on famine fiction, sham religions. Rumi's lover stands convicted. Man is tripping. When we fall, we'll realize that we're yet to even crawl. This episode is sponsored by GPS, which stands for Goosebumps Plus Science, a new app that detects the language of your intuition, such as goosebumps, shivers, and a spectrum of other somatic signals, which the app will translate for you. As a wise woman once said, we're all going to Chicago, but there are paths of less resistance that might turn your suffer bus into a joyride hearse cruise. Clears throat. So recently I've decided to add little quotes. I collect quotes at the top of the episode. So today's 2 quotes are from Herman Hesse, my big brother. Can't wait to hang with him in the afterlife. What's up, Herman? So 2 quotes that go very well together in my opinion. The first is, God does not send us despair in order to kill us. He sends it in order to awaken us to new life. The other one, we must become so alone, so utterly alone, that we withdraw into our innermost self. It is a way of bitter suffering. But then our solitude is overcome. We are no longer alone, for we find that our innermost self is the Spirit, that it is God, the indivisible. And suddenly we find ourselves in the midst of the world, yet undisturbed by its multiplicity. For our innermost soul, we know ourselves to be one with all being. Welcome to the Pinkhurst Podcast. Our return guest is Astrid Schmidt, and I'm not reading bios because Molly inspired me to rebel in that way. Instead, I invite you, if you're down, to just tell us who you are in this moment as a shape-shifting being. What are you wearing today in your costume orientation?
Thank you. It's great to be back. Good to see you, Zachary. I'm in some, I'm not sure how this will come across today because I'm in some vulnerable inner territory, but the quote you read really spoke to me. Just the idea of what is getting really brass tacks, what's at the center, what's at the core, just wanting to get really, really quiet, feeling really allergic to noise, and wanting to that this practice for me right now is coming back to that core place of the self. And that's starting to feel just way more, it's just there, and it's tangible and reliable, and it gives me deep comfort to know that that's the ultimate who I am at my core, and the part of me that goes on forever is the only thing that's real amidst navigating life and things that feel crunchy, and just being I want to hold everything so lightly right now. So lightly, and just be really nimble. So I'm trying to just get really nimble.
I love that.
Yeah.
Me too. Recently, as of maybe 3 days, my son and my mom, we were in the living room, and my mom said, "Do you guys want to meditate?" Apparently, Rock and my mom have done this before, so he was excited to meditate, and I said, "Sure." So we started oming, and then just sitting there, not long. He didn't have too much patience, but in the past, I've never enjoyed meditating for the most part. It felt like, I don't know, it just felt uncomfortable in a way that didn't feel healthy almost. It just didn't feel right for me. And now it's reminding me of what you said. When I did that the first time, and I was doing it a minute ago, I'm able to drop right into that blissful peace place without really any strife or stress. And it's pretty awesome. And I think as I mentioned, the title of this episode, Home Again, because my dad always used to say that when we would arrive, pull up to the house, home again, jiggity jig. Inspired by the telepathy tapes, which I just told you about, and I spoke a bit about on the last episode with Jana Romer, Molly and I have been having pretty powerful climactic confirmations of things we've both felt in our hearts growing up, intuitively, in my poetry, in my writing, in our love, in our relationship, in our discussions, in the texts that we study. So hearing it through the lens of Kai Dickens, this documentarian, working with scientists, doing research on nonverbal autistic children, which is just the tip of the iceberg, the telepathy that's been uncovered, and all these other glimpses into unfathomable, other dimensional, magical, eternal, ancient truths, perhaps. It's that feeling of going home again, always going home again. And the home again is right here when we drop in, like you said, And so that's what today feels like for me as we explore. The first episode we did, I was in a quite dark, intentionally surrendered place. I'd just officially gotten sober. Not that I was ever... Anyway, I haven't really been a partier for over a decade, but I was drinking a little beer and wine, and removing social media, etc. It was a huge fall to my knees, writhing in discomfort, depression, stripping. And now I feel like that process was incredibly effective. I almost feel like I bared too much in the first episode. I didn't feel that way, but some people I love were like, whoa, man, you really almost abandoned yourself. And that made me feel sad, because my intention was and is always with this stuff as an artist to put myself on the table as kind of a metaphor example. So today, obviously, we'll go wherever we want to go, but I think there's this kind of beautiful balance between the quotes that I read from Hess about despair is not to hurt us or kill us, it's to awaken us, and to, need to become so alone, and it is a bitter way of suffering, but then when the solitude is overcome, we're actually connected to that eternal peace. So there's that side of the medicine and the beauty of allowing this grief or whatever it is, that you experience. And then there's the fine line where my stepdad had mentioned after hearing our episode, and he deals with a lot of what we spoke about, this idea of pain versus suffering. And let me see, he texted me this morning. He just said, I'd add that while depression can create space and impetus for consciousness, it can also just be depleting and disabling and dangerous. Takes time and intention and help, I think, to learn to live generatively with it. Mm. So I think that's a kind of beautiful combination of how I'd like to hold this vague, not that the whole podcast today is about what the first one felt more centered in, which is melancholia or depression. But yeah, I'd like to just add that to the mix as we explore. So yes, I was in the fire. I feel renewed in a way I've never experienced. I feel like the cataclysmic shift of consciousness is in full effect, and that, God is peeking through, and that trippy ass shit's about to happen, and I've been waiting my whole life, and I'm having the time of my life. How are you doing today? That's where I've been.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, it's a delicate thing, right? Like just something about coming out the other side and seeing what and how I was holding it allowed it to be generative? When is it generative? When is it something I need to turn away from? Just the sort of like nuances of navigating pain, depression. I mean, I think for me, I'm interested right now in like in power and where I lose power. And, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, my word for the year was impeccable. You know, I don't know a lot about Gene Keys, but that's my life theme. And it means not capable of sin, which is basically like coming out of Christ consciousness and being distorted in thought, you know? And so, but now I'm like, oh, I'm getting like my ass kicked, right? To be impeccable. Like that was kind of a high bar to set. And I always forget that, the showdown with the opposite when you call something in. But also like it's calling me forward, like in my mothering and just this idea of like my word and what it means to keep my word, you know, and if that feels like part of impeccability and it's something I've struggled with lifelong, you know, feel like I can't make the promise because I don't know actually if I'll make good on it, you know, like fuck. And then, so that's what I'm working with this year. And that feels good. It feels good to be called to a high bar by myself, you know, and also it's kind of harrowing at the same time.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I read a bit of Awakening Osiris, which is the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Let's see, I wrote about this for our episode. So it's by a woman named Normandi Ellis, who will be coming on the show next month. And it's a translation of texts far before and after Christ, Egyptian, you know, scriptures that people know as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It's actually called the Book of Coming Forth by Day. And it, along with the telepathy tapes again, and all these different scriptures and parts that have come from me, it's all pointing to the same thing of eternity and rebirth. But there's a part in it that it's reminding me of what you're saying, where when light is being called for, or like there's a reflection of standing up in light and being real with the light, whatever that is, those who ignore it, in this text at least, I'm not big into condemnation per se. I do believe we're all going home regardless of what happens. It's just the difference between resistance and surrender, which will make your experience different. But in this text, it says if you don't stand up to your impeccability when there's a part of you that knows it's time to do that, you will be turned into a fish or some sort of creature that in this text is implied that is lesser than, which also I have trouble with. But you will become alienated, and even though you pray, you will not be heard because you missed your chance to stand up for the choice, and there are choices. And then the person goes on to say that the pain and the darkness, or the opposite of your impeccableness, is so excruciating, and they have to cut it out of themselves. And it's unbearable pain that they have to cut out. But then as they walk, this process of doing that, cleansing almost, is what allows this unfathomable ecstasy and joy of what happens when you are able to give your life to the eternity, to the light, and it's more complex than that, but I notice a lot of kind of synchronicities, and hearing you say that reminded me of that voice this morning.
I love that.
Yeah, cutting out your whatever, older parts that, and like my depression, they felt unbearable, and yet it's brought me to places of joy that I can't even quantify. Well, let's see. So I think I want to talk about what you want to talk about. And you had sent me, which you kind of touched on a little bit, but we were talking, and you wanted to, a few things you had. We were talking about what to do with all of the no, that's me. Sorry. Inner child. I've been thinking about core material and how outer events will trigger it, since nature will stop at nothing to get at our healing. So that's a nice idea. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Yes, that I think just the world being what it is, and like anticipating it's going to continue to be bumpy and unpredictable, and I think there's a way in which, like, if we're on a journey, which I think we are, of personal power, we're going to continue to be triggered in small ways, in larger ways, in our own intimate relationships, our boss, our whatever, the outer world will be triggered and activated in ways that, like, on one level, it feels like life is only all of the outer sort of choreography is only happening so that we can get, like, through those symbols, align in such a way that in a moment in time we can get a close enough dose of something that has not yet healed or needs our attention, that kind of reverberates in a similar enough way to our core wounding, that allows it to thaw, that allows it to move and integrate and be digested, right? And so I think that just feels like that's one piece of it. I mean, there's the other thing of like to be in my own experience, for example, to feel like on the other side of a lot of thresholds of power and woundology, and feeling like integrated in satisfactory ways, that's a kind of a funny statement, but like, I feel like earlier on in my life and healing career and trajectory, it was like, shit was really rocky, really huge. And then as I integrated that, things simmer down. There's more stability, more peace. And I think even with that sort of idea of wholeness or coming, feeling whole unto ourselves, we're always whole, but to feel like we're reclaiming these parts that were rejected, disowned, and reabsorbing them back into the body and feeling more integrated. Life is still going to be challenging, and the outer world is still going to be popping off, and I think on that level too, it even without our core material being activated only, I think there's also that piece, maybe Francis Weller talks about this, where it's like whatever grief we carry around what we're seeing, from a place of like, this is who I am, and wow, this is what I'm seeing, and this is how it feels, and what to do with that, and I think that's like, so maybe they're two separate but connected aspects of like the outer choreography. But I do think the more we're, in my experience and in working with folks, as a guide for the last 18 years, like when outer things are happening, people will focus on certain symbols. Some people will focus more on ecological stuff. Some people will focus more on politics. Like we're going to be sort of like magnetized to the thing that's pertinent to our own constitution, if that makes sense. And in that way, it's like, how do we personalize it as being like, oh, this was tailor-made for me to meet something in myself. All these symbols are neutral. Everything's neutral.
Okay, here's an example of that. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, backing up in our car, it has the video rear view. You know what I mean? So it's like the modern, I guess it's not very modern now, but feels kind of modern still, luckily. Still in my pre-cell phone attached memories of being that. And for the first time, I noticed the video was not what was behind me. So it was a glitch. It was a loop from like an hour ago. And if I hadn't been paying attention, I would have backed up into the car that was much closer behind me than what the video was showing. So I was glad. It was a good keep me on my toes awareness moment. And then just thinking about it, I don't know, a little while after, I thought that's actually a kind of cute, sweet metaphor. So I haven't fully grokked it yet, but it's like the things that I'm looking back at in my past aren't actually what's there now. It's so, and that kind of goes with the evolution that's we're always a part of, but it seems much more powerful right now. I don't know if you can feel it, but it seems like, whoa, like the world is activated. Astrologically, apparently it's activated. The fires, obviously are activated. I mean, there's a big energy in the world right now. So to me, that's maybe a little example of an interpretation that's neutral, but I was able to interpret it poetically for my own use.
I love that.
Just a random little thing,
Yeah.
but I really yeah, I love how you're watching your experience and yeah, everything you just said about kind of the outer world conspiring to bring to light the parts that are wounded as an attempt to reconcile and heal is very powerful. So what is that like for you these days? The idea of honing your GPS, if you will, as I made that fake advertisement in the beginning. But how are, and even holding things lightly that you mentioned toward the beginning. What is that dance looking like these days of how you're navigating the noise of the world, allergic to noise? You know, so many opinions out there. We've spoken about this in the past, just how we hold our truth, our passion, our creativity, our vocations, and then have to bring that into social media, whatever. What's your dance like of the sensitivity to hear what's for you, to respond, to flow?
Because I'm in this like state of more quiet and being on the inner and being like because the other piece, and we may or may not get into inner child specifically, but like in terms of what to do with the here and now, activating us for our healing and evolution and consciousness and ascension. But part of that is also like just a lot of communication with God and life, and to be like, help me understand. I don't understand how this is for my good and in my favor. Like, I'm not getting it. Talk to me, help me get it, help me get the download, and just like this disposition. I don't know if I answered your question or just one I made up.
No, it is,
but,
yeah.
But like how to hold whatever is happening, if it isn't what I prefer, as medicine, and trusting that it's medicine, and to be like, life wants me to be whole. Life wants me to be so full of my own energy and so satisfied, and so like to walk the path of my destiny. Like life is only doing that. So anything that's happening that seems like it's a squeeze or a crunch, or it's not like it's going off track, it's like, oh, but this is for me. So how do I receive the medicine of this as part of that service of like, we're doing this management, we're doing this to assist you in getting the thing that you want, right? And so there's that conversation with life itself, and with
that's everything right there. Yeah. I mean, that kind of perspective or cosmology or way of holding reality, I think, is a game-changing, just way of being, because it's beautiful. I love that, and that's how I've been more. I think it's my nature, but the more I lean into it consciously, the more fun it all becomes. The more that benevolence that the universe wants us to be who we are, because it benefits the universe as well as us. It's like this. So on that note, there's a lot of unschooling, right, for ourselves, unlearning. People say things like that. So there's a lot of that for us. And then as parents, I'm wondering about that. I'm about to potentially homeschool Rock. I'd be the primary one doing that. Obviously, Molly and my mom will support. Yeah. And that line in Taekwondo this morning, overhearing Molly and another mother talking about unschooling and the innate hunger that comes up, but then that fine line between you don't want to fully maybe not stoke the fire. So yeah, it's not a specific question, but I'm just thinking about our own unschooling that we're going through. And then how that might reverberate to our children. Do you have any thoughts on those things?
Well, I feel like it's like an unprecedented time to be parenting, to be a human, and then to be parenting. It's like, okay. And, trying to also be nimble in that, and trusting that, we're all here exactly on purpose, spiritual consent to be here at this particular time. And like, it's going to be good, but also I think, in, I guess, maybe some of the collective, witnessing of the structures that don't necessarily serve. And like, I felt this when I get my kids up for school in the winter and it's dark out and it's like, wake up, why? You got to go into the machine. Like, and like living in New York City, like go, and just this sort of like, how do I, like, this is where we're at. So that has to be okay. And also, when it feels hard, it's hard because you're not crazy. Like this is literally a machine that's like a flesh eating, like, there's a way in which it's not just, this isn't like normal, so the ways in which you're put in an environment that feel challenging, it's literally just made up. So, you know what I mean? So I think when you mentioned wanting to homeschool and just being in a state, you and Molly, or myself, like to be in a position where you feel open and curious and flexible and like wanting to see and work with the world and yourselves. And I just think that's so much of the parenting, to just see the grapple versus like, we're going to lock and load into this like machine, you know what I mean? Just like, not that that's good or bad, but to sort of observe and feel the wrestling and the grappling and the grieving and the, like, what is it? I just think that's doing something like tenderizing them, like preparing them for something. And how to like trust it all and trust that they're here on purpose. So it's not like whatever the outer symbols are that are going to continue to be more, I don't know, maybe even continue to be more of an impetus to like rely on your own imagination for what you want to create instead of just reacting to what has been created. Like, I think there's much more, there's this sort of exhilaration, I think, around the chaos in that sense,
And a natural flow of just the difference between, for me, the motoring and the ambition, as opposed to being a sailboat with my sails in a certain way that the wind, when it comes, I catch it easily. It's not even any force on my part. And when it's still, I'm still, and I don't have to try to move, that kind of thing. Mm. And there's a lot around that. I mean, there's right now when things go haywire outside, whether it's fires, whether it's telepathy tapes tripping my household out in a wonderful way, I had this feeling. It's a weird situation because I was peeing and suddenly I felt this presence of like an ancient spiritual warrior who would like throw their fist up, but I was peeing. So it was a weird situation anyway, but like the symbolic, like charge when someone puts their fist up at the front of a battle, and it's not a battle exactly. It was more of like a love, like surge of all of these ancestors from, everyone, past, present, future, but the love warriors, if you will. And I feel like that's happening right now. Like something is coming to the surface. And in the past, like when I was manic in Harlem, I feel like I threw my fist up and charged out into the middle of the street and no one else came with me. And I went prematurely and I was like, wait. And everyone, the humans were looking at me like, what the fuck? And I'm like, no, there's infinite spirits behind me. And they're like, nah. So there's this kind of excitement I get when this time and what's happening where I want to play hooky. We don't need to force stuff. I don't want to feed it into the machine. I want to allow the downloads to come, the trusting the deciduousness of ourselves. I don't know, but it's a balance. I'm trying to balance it all.
Yeah, it's like when we were talking about that idea of being convicted that it's all from like, whether we're there automatic, like that everything that life is doing is here for my highest evolution.
Yes.
There's something that maybe just left my mind about that.
I feel like that too right now.
About being like trusting also that like I have every single thing I need to thrive here. I'm built and designed to be here versus like
lack.
Or feeling like, I don't know what I'm insecure. I don't know, just the like mantra of like, I'm not doing it right. Or like, I can't do this and just that mantra were so powerful of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm confused. I can't. That alone whether you can or can't. If you believe you can't, you won't. You know what I mean? Just like how to self-empower, self-lead
100%.
our own, from a place of power because like if you choose to believe that, you'll find the capacity.
And there's just timing with everything, there's this kind of natural unfolding. It takes time. We have flashes, and I can see there are moments when there's movement, and there's times when it feels stagnant. And recently it's felt like a lot of movement for me in a beautiful way. The depression part was stagnant, and that was essential to the movement. And when the movement comes, I found out my birth time through a random text message of someone who was in a film my dad made, who sent me a photo of my birth announcement. And we haven't been able to find my birth time, and neither of my parents could decide when it was. And Molly even paid the hospital in London, and they sent it without the birth time. And this has been like a mystery for 10 years. And right after the telepathy tapes and this revelation, that comes unbidden, which reveals that I guess I'm a double Leo. And my human design apparently is something called like easy breezy genius or something like that. Yeah, which is something about like the easy genius or something.
Both my kids are 2-4.
Which is and the hermit, the opportunist hermit or something like that, which is so amazing. But it makes sense because every time I've tried, it doesn't work. And when I allow and surrender, everything is so, flow. But of course I have to try and make mistakes. So that's why it's perfect how the world is bringing me the ingredients I need. Reading Hermann Hesse and his entire body of work again, because that's how I operate with authors. If I love them, I go all the way in. He brought me to the idea of Abraxas, which is the Gnostic embodiment of God as the devil and God simultaneously. And this radical acceptance of all parts of yourself, inner and outer, which then allows me to accept and surrender into my nature, which is not all light, which is not all flow. But then by accepting that, it allows me to flow more because I'm not resisting the parts that aren't flow. And then I do become all flow I don't know, it's, if that makes sense. And I forgot that I actually wanted to read a little more Hesse. This is the opening of his third novel, Gertrude. It's one paragraph. When I take a long look at my life, as though from outside, it does not appear particularly happy. Yet, I am even less justified in calling it unhappy, despite all its mistakes. After all, it is foolish to keep probing for happiness or unhappiness, for it seems to me it would be hard to exchange the unhappiest days of my life for all the happy ones. If what matters in a person's existence is to accept the inevitable consciously, to taste the good and bad to the full, and to make for oneself a more individual, unaccidental, and inward destiny alongside one's external fate, then my life has been neither empty nor worthless. Even if, as it is decreed by the gods, fate has inexorably trod over my external existence as it does with everyone, my inner life has been of my own making. I deserve its sweetness and bitterness and accept full responsibility for it. I love that. I just wanted to put that out there into the atmosphere. I took time off the podcast, as I think I took time off everything because I was exhausted from noise and external scratching. I just felt empty and like I wasn't listening to the silence enough. And now that I'm coming back, it's a delicate dance. I'm trying to bring my lessons from the quiet back into the talking, which brings me to this concept I wanted to ask you about or inquire. The cosmic awarenesses. It sounds like from knowing you a bit, the ascension, talking to God, you have your own relationship with this world being more than it seems, and that we are beings who are not just confined to bodies, etc. Mystery. I'm very interested these days, especially with taking that kind of spiritual awareness. For me, the eureka of I am eternal through the telepathy tapes, which, words are words, but it hit me in such a way in my makeup that it definitely added a huge validation to this suspicion. How do you imbue the ordinary day-to-day, the aches, the pains, the confusion, the material world with that awareness in such a way where even when you fall into anger, sickness, injury, confusion, you can still have a touch point to that eternal enlightenment, if you will, to be a guiding strength through it all. Like I don't believe enlightenment, you're going to just be, maybe, shit, why not? Be always happy in the form. That would be great. I'm open to it. But if that's not the case, how can you still imbue the quiet moment to moment so you're not having just huge MDMA without MDMA feelings and then giant letdowns because you're sucked back into the mortal coil and everything is fucked?
I think I don't want to say this. It's sort of like, for me, the moments of contraction or like the falling down, or this week, both sickness and also just sucker punched by life, just things coming up and being like, whoa. And because I'm always looking for the medicine in that, and because I'm in such deep love with life and everything that's happening in my life, I trust it because I trust my life. And so if it's in it, that means it's for me. And so when I'm hitting that bottom or hitting that like pain point, I think this is where this is for me like the goal of healing work, frankly, is to be like so whole and so at home with all these parts, as you mentioned in that beautiful passage, like to be able to be just in the deepest reverence in those moments. And sometimes the contraction is even more gorgeous and exquisite than the lighter moments of joy. Like it feels real, and it feels like so deeply held in grace, and like this fierce grace, like thing happening, that it feels so like it's that there, it's never not happening. It's there in the joy, but sometimes it's like lighter and more blissful and whatever. But then to be held in the reverence of like, this is why I say like we get to be depressed, because it's like we get to be here, period. So anything that's happening on the entire continuum from the birth to death experience, holy shit, what a gift. So for me, that's the practice is like, there might be a part that comes up that objects, that feels overwhelmed, that feels out of sorts, that feels like I'm fucked or I hate my life or whatever the fuck, what I mean? Like the smaller parts that are like, no, excuse me. And then but in that coming up, it feels to me like, I keep landing in this deeper container that's underwriting, is that the word? Like holding all of it, that belies all of it. And in that, there's such deep reverence, and so I think that's why I'm so crazy about reverence, because otherwise, if we're in this sort of like gross plane, then when things go wrong, that's bad. When we're depressed, bad, versus like every single fucking breath and moment is a gift. And we're entitled to none of it.
Yeah. It's funny, from the peaceful place, any reaching of my mind to say, oh, what should we talk about next? Or it's almost for naught and silly. Like I feel just calm and relaxed right now. It's hard to do podcasts this way. Juju's barking in the background, so maybe he's trying to ad-lib. One thought that did flicker past, but again, I'm unsure if anything even needs to be said. I actually feel like we've already tapped into the core of what wanted to come through today, which is just a confirmation via you and us combined that, yeah, the reverence and the choice of how to view life conspiring to make you more whole, to bring you to your fullest nature is the best way to flow and to get home again. But I was thinking about, our first episode, thinking about Bill, thinking about words and the futility of them, and how you don't want to, glorify depression, because then someone could say, well, so-and-so killed themselves, or XYZ, you don't understand my situation. I'm blessed to be able to live the way I do for many reasons. Homeschooling is a luxury for most people. I understand that. So I also, though, think about the danger in that too, of like acting as if only some of us, like these magical laws of the universe, only to apply to some of the more fortunate ones. It's such a slippery slope. And I'm thinking of Joseph Campbell. And I don't know how I feel about this, so I'm bringing it through, but it crossed my mind. It's funny. It's kind of funny. I mean, there was a lot of racism back in the day with these cats, right? Like even there's some weird stuff in Hess where I'm like, bro, what the fuck? You're my big brother. How could you have a blind spot there, it seems? So I don't know if this is going to make sense, but apparently Campbell was approached by a man, or was having a conversation with a man who was Black. And the man apparently was going on and on about his situation, identified as being a Black man in America and how oppressed. And his whole portrayal of himself to Campbell was of that. Like, that's how he identified. And Campbell at one point was like, bro, stop identifying as just that. You're limiting yourself. And like was very dismissive. And reading that, it made me feel like a little like, whoa. Is that appropriate? I mean, he is a white man able to just like dismiss. So I'm holding both. It's like, no, maybe in some ways, but then two, I'm like, but without that, you are kind of trapped in the identification of your situation and using that as another reason why you can't do what I think is universal law of you and you and you know what I'm saying?
Totally. So
it's that fine line of like, the shit we're talking about is only okay if so-and-so is like not so depressed. Is that true though? Or should we empower people to say, yo, you're God, you're doing this intentionally, no matter the situation you're in? What is that dance? Again, I'm not even asking a question. I just think it's a funny situation, especially as like a guide, a therapist, a teacher. We're supposed to like somehow assist people in their awakening as we're doing it for ourselves. Anything come up around that?
Totally.
Yeah.
A lot. I think it's universal, right? These are like principles that aren't just apply to some people, right? And especially in the sense of like the idea of personal power, and to be like, not to diminish institutionalized oppression, right? But also at the same time, on some level, it's here, and like doesn't mean to accept it, but also like, how to describe it? It's like, so like the way I can explain it perhaps is like, and working through like scarcity work this past couple of years. And if I talk to my child about like scarcity and, money is just a decision. It's not, it's an energy. It's abundant. She's like, tell that to someone who's homeless. Right. And it's like, is it fair that I have the luxury and privilege to have the space to pull back, to do this work on the inner, to, to receive these truths, but somebody else is in survival mode? No, it's not fair. It's fucked up, and like, but also because I have that access to that capacity, because I'm not in a war zone, or what, just like, it feels like more of a responsibility to claim that wisdom. Or when it comes to racism, I'm a light-skinned, Black, biracial, white passing, so to speak, like person, right? And so there's a lot, and I've done a lot of work around examining all of that comes with, right, the privilege of my complexion, what it means to argue for limitation, just like think what to do with the oppression piece versus who does it benefit to stay in the status of like one down position. That's just to me like that is, yeah. And so internalized racism is a thing, right? Where it's like, wow, how convenient the system just you get to internalize that belief system. And it's one thing to acknowledge it, I think, and to honor it and to work to change it. But it's another thing to live. And this could be around any like part of our identity that is like disempowers us, where it's like, if it's used as a way to identify to stay in a one down position, then it's sort of like, for your own sake, for your own evolution, for your own personal power, what's available here, So I do think it doesn't mean it's fair that some people have more access than others, but I think the ones with more access are more responsible.
And at a certain point, it's a choice to some extent, I guess, to acknowledge what you're born into and then to kind of use that to your advantage and transcend it almost. Like if that makes sense. Michael Meade was saying how people in America often are up in arms about choice. They want more choice in this, and we're getting our choices taken away. This is out of context, so I don't. But he said the truth is, the things that really matter. We don't have any choice. How short you are, where you're born, how intelligent you are. Actually, like the brain you're born into is not up to you. And then looking at what might be perceived as limitations externally. Again, I'm saying all this lightly and it's abstract. So I love your daughter's question. But yeah, basically, I think we've said it. Who knows? The answer is I don't know. But I definitely love the idea of claiming and seeing the responsibility of being in the position we are to claim those wisdoms. That's beautiful. Which also is something you were talking about, the response to world events, the personal power, how we will be triggered by outer events to meet our core, which we spoke about. And during a time that's so loud, it does seem in the same vein of Joseph Campbell and that guy and scarcity and these different realms, that there's such a chatter about what's right and what's wrong and good and bad. And, we're quickly swept into accidental lives, to reverse what Hess's character says of my goal here is to be unaccidental. I want to be unaccidental. I want to be me. I don't want to be this body. I don't want to be. So what is that like for you these days with, the pressure of society's, good, bad, right, wrong, when it seems like we are being asked to hold paradox and to embody everything all at once somehow, more and more.
Yeah, maybe I pinged this to you when we were anticipating this conversation, but like it makes me think about it, along the lines of not really being available for noise. And because there's so much distortion and so much predation and so much dysfunction, like at a rolling boil on the outer, I'm not available to engage. And I'm not available to like hemorrhage life force into things on principle, into things like, and that doesn't mean like the piece I think that we messaged about was around like how to know I'm interested in what's correct to respond to for me or anybody, like myself as maybe a template where it's like, where and how am I supposed to respond to all the things that are happening outside, right? And like what, and I think there's some things that are for me to entangle with and that are correct for me to meet on
part
the
of
outer.
Your awakening.
Yeah, to be like,
unfolding.
I'm going to put some skin in the game here. I'm called into this conversation. And then there's some around other like world events where I'm like, I have literally no idea what's going on. And I don't have time to get a PhD in what is going on in the Middle East. And someone could say you're out of touch and ignorant and yada, yada for not being more educated around that. Right. And that I could see why they would say that. And maybe they're correct. Just like I could look at the George Floyd, someone might be like, I'm sitting this one out. And I'd be like, you know, so I feel like
Ja Rule. Remember the Ja Rule joke about Dave Chappelle? It was like the Twin Towers, and when MTV used to do the news reports, and it was Dave Chappelle was making fun of the whole situation. It was like the Twin Towers happens, and they're like, Ja Rule, what do you think about it? Right. And he's like, who gives a fuck what Ja Rule thinks about it? Like, what are we talking about?
Exactly. So I think there's like this way in which, because it's so ungrounding and we're getting like triggered into our survival zone, to be like, I have to respond to this because I care. I'm an empath and like this is fucked up, so I need to respond to this. Now I need to respond to this. And it's sort of like, but are you supposed to be responding to that? Right? Greta, I always use this joke. I don't even know what this means, but like Greta Thunberg, she might be wanting to sail around the world, never use a plane, and wishes it for everybody to do that also. Yeah. But I'm not going to fight that fight because that's not my fight to fight. It's someone else's fight. So like like where and how to stay in our center and our knowing and our truth around like where am I actually supposed to be, and what am I supposed to be paying attention to of all the infinite gazillion particles of information, and what is actually correct for me? What's correct?
To crystallize it, to get precise with it, and when you're engaging in the chatter of being seduced into obligations or guilt tripped, or I remember the day after the election was announced, I was so angry and grief stricken. But then I was talking to my therapist and I just felt so confused. Everything, like you said, I'm just so confused. And it's beautiful because I think it's returning me into the moment where everything falls away and I am able to be in touch with my GPS and be who I am and contribute what I am in the most authentic way, invisibly and literally. And I always mention this quote by Alan Watts said, "Kindly let me help you or you will drown," said the monkey, putting the fish safely up in a tree. I think that's one of the funniest ideas, that helping another person is like a monkey taking a fish out of the water to save it from drowning. It's kind of true. Well, I think I do feel complete. I do want to mention that on the past episode with Jana Romer called Year of the Snake, we explored the astrology that's going on right now. And I touched upon this feeling of brain fog that I've been having for a while, which I also feel in this conversation in myself. And I equated it to kind of that idea of the moth and the flame, that the flame being the mystery and I'm the moth. And as I try to get close to these nuanced discussions that we're having, it's like my brain starts to flicker and short out because I don't have the language. And Jana really beautifully mentioned that she sees this brain fog everywhere right now in a lot of people. And she believes that it's a sign that the new consciousness is coming in. I love that. Like our apps are updating. Yeah. And so I've been feeling that. I just want to mention that to everyone listening and to myself, because there's a part of me when I do talk and create it from this space, I'm like, what am I even offering? It seems fuzzy and vague, and I don't, because I think we're conditioned to need to produce like, here's the result. This is how it'll help you. Here's the hypothesis, X equals A, blah, 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 blah. And that's not what this is. And that's not where we are. So holding in the tension, which I think we're both doing, which for me can also feel uncomfortable, like I said, as my brain tries to grapple with the unknown, that in and of itself, I hope resonates as something meaningful to somebody out there.
It resonates with me.
Good. There you go. And me stretched. Too. Yeah. Yeah. Stretch, taut. I like the word taut without a GH, like a drum skin is taut to be drummed upon. That's how we are taught.
Just the idea of like, even on the global to be like, how is it, with the politics and all the things happening, how is this for me? And the idea you mentioned, like the election, just this something about, because we can't lose what's real. We can only lose what is not true or no longer is true. That like something about, this is just in my experience, where it's like more releasing of this outer symbol of power to be like self-initiated, and the discomfort of that, of like, oh, this is my rodeo. The power is within me, right? And like, what will it mean as like, more and more of us sort of release the idea of like daddy government, or is going to save or do whatever. Like, how do we kind of absorb some of that and initiate ourselves in different ways with that power? But also, I think in all of this sort of like chaos and dysfunction and like smoke and mirrors aspect, I think that is disorienting. And I think that there was a nugget, a takeaway, right? Like around this like core theme around the home piece. It's sort of like, that's what's real. Like that's the sort of sanctuary point, is like, when in doubt, like, is that real? What am I hearing? Is this person saying this thing, but their mouth is saying so, like, and then but there is something that feels just like a deep anchor there's an indestructible anchor inside of each one of us, I guess is what I want to say, of truth. And that feels like that's not up for grabs. Nobody can take it away from you. It's not bipartisan, or, it's just sort of like, that's there. So like, that's a beautiful thing to want to land in and seek refuge in. But I liked what you were saying too about, whether it's astrological or just these new energies coming in, just feeling that also around, like, I don't know. I think it's going to get very interesting. I'm just even noticing in the middle of the night, I'll wake up and feel this like energy coming into my body. I'm like, sure, sure, guys, work on me while I sleep. That's fine. And sort of like even asking for that a little bit, to be like, please update and upgrade my system and align me, like may divine order be established in all of my bodies, work on me in my sleep, and then funny things will start to happen in the middle of the night, So I think there's just something about that that's interesting and kind of does get into fuzzy zones of like, Well,
I love what you just said. Like, I adore what you just said. And it reminds me of my mom mentioning a Thich Nhat Hanh quote the other day, where he said something like, meditation is not, escaping reality. It is reality. The telepathy tapes implies that on a deep level, we're all telepathic. That's why when Rumi was asked, why do you write so much about silence? He said, the radiant one in me has never said a word. The radiant one in me has never said a word, but is always hearing and communicating. The lying only works if we all participate in it. But deep down, we know, like you just said, that's so true. I know that refuge. The problem for me, as my app updates, is talking feels clunky. Words feel clunky. So that's part of it. That's what I was feeling before. Like, I can feel this centered bliss, like tug of gravity to the center of my solar plexus of and from there to even like start to try to say something is kind of like silly. It's ripples. It's funny, man.
The limits of language.
The limits of language. And that's why we're taught like a drum skin. And then I could just imagine, like Kevin put a djembe bongo sound, but a little, the gods start tip tapping on the tautness, and then we start dancing. You don't need to be taught with a GHT. You need to be taught, stretched like a fucking animal hide, so that the gods can tip tap on your motherfucking soul and make that new music. And I was making a really bad joke because taut and drumming, I don't know why this is popping in. This is a bad joke, but a lot of the talks in the telepathy tapes is connected to things like savants, unexplained savants who have brain injuries and come to and are able to understand other languages, calculus, all this kind of stuff. And so in that show, they talk about going to different dimensions and learning at, telepathically from angels, etc. I made a really bad joke, and I was like, why send your kid to school? Just hit them in the head with a shovel, and then they'll fucking be geniuses. You just unlock it. Obviously, good. We're not going to do that. But there's something connected to that in a gentler, beautiful way to me of the taught. I'm now want to change the episode name, but I can't. Home again. But taught, T-A-U-T.
Just to add to that, I think there's something that as we're winding down, like I'm in a new partnership for the past.
Congratulations. I heard. Yeah, happy for you, really.
It's amazing. He's incredible, but and he is deaf. And we're having the most incredible conversations around language and around like the space around language, and just it's sort of like just being around this person I'm in that state of like fuzzy, like what, like ineffable state. And I'm so intrigued by that. So that's like, that's something that's that sort of fascination with him as sort of like a human crystal that I'm just like so intrigued by. So it's just pinging a lot, everything you're saying around what we're taught, what languages, where do we get information from? What is it? Like, what does it seem to be versus what's available, and the sort of like never ending fractal genius of reality and just being like, holy shit. So I think that's also part of this moment of being interested in quiet and silence and wanting to shut the fuck up, basically.
Yes. When I did an episode recently with my dad, I put a quote in the description of Helen Keller, saying that life is a daring adventure or nothing, basically, and nothing is certain. And just this beautiful quote. And I showed my dad, and he reminded me, I had totally forgotten that he had met Helen Keller when he was 11. She touched his face.
Whoa.
And Helen Keller was deaf, blind, and mute, I believe, or deaf and blind, which would imply you would probably be somewhat mute.
Yeah.
And then her caretaker, Mary, apparently, I believe her name was, taught her to speak by holding her hand on her throat to feel the vibrations and like putting her hand underwater at the same time, saying water. And so she ended up giving inspirational speeches throughout her life. Talk about like a courageous, all the souls, all the patient souls, it's crazy. And I just wanted to, because originally we were going to call this Shadow Kite, and I just wanted to read this poem. Poetry for me is the closest tongue that I can use these days in the presence of the mystery, as powerful as it seems. So I'll say this, and then you say anything or nothing, and then we'll fade into some music and to be continued. Shadow Kite, you stubborn beauty, through all these years you just keep showing up. What's your secret? If I didn't know better, I'd think you were dumb, just an animal attracted to scent. But there's something holy about your gravitational pull, more than just instinct, a conscious choice. Not that animals aren't intelligent, of course. Beg pardon, creature friends. I guess what I'm trying to say is a ritual. That's what you have. And I'm a little jealous, to be honest, inspired. We humans are so finicky, always reacting to the slightest unknown. Moods dominating our inner skies, and then our kites gather bitter dust, and our wrists that used to draw rainbows with crayons can become razor war zones. But not you. You're out here every day, kite tattered or new, sky wild or serene, crayons worn down to the nub, even the brown one, waltzing with the thunder beings, dancing with the sun. And here I come, lumbering along, doing my best to be like you, consistent but never the same. Sheesh, it's not easy to be so alive. It's like there's glue in my bones and anchors on my heart. I have to keep overriding my natural inclinations to fall into an echo trap, because a ritual is just a container. You taught me that. I learned by watching you. You ain't no robot beast, no happy fool. You dance in the minefield, all the emotions flickering in your eyes, knowing that you could explode at any second, not playing to win, playing to play, never saying a word, until today, when you read me this poem. Shadow Kite. Keep flying the kite. That's what you're doing. That's what I'm doing now, learning to, and that's what all of our true selves are always doing. I think, I feel, and we just keep gathering bitter dust. It's easier than we realize. It's very easy. Trying's the addiction, as my wise wife told me.
I love your wife.
I know.
She's awesome.
She loves you. That. She said to send her love. You guys should go listen to the episode that Molly and Astrid did on the whole Paradox podcast. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, that was awesome. I love that. It just made me think of something of like when you had that poem, like the kite string versus the cuts on the like how we hold life, but also just this piece around like innocence and joy, and the way that like the inner child, how to live in service in some way of like protecting that part of ourselves, that innocence and joy and magic, and then when it starts to feel too burdened, too dark, to be like, oh, there's something that's disbalanced, because there is also the truth that there is this magical, joyful, innocent, playful part, like wanting to protect that feels important.
Huge. I mean, it's everything. That's all there. I mean, the last thing I'll say is in the telepathy tapes, the non-speakers, one of the messages from them is that the only thing that matters in this reality is creativity and love. And that after we die, everything that we feel, human bullshit basically is small potatoes and doesn't mean anything. So it's all about kindness, authenticity, love, creativity. So
that's beautiful. I love that.
And it's complex. It's very complex.
Also sometimes not so simple.
Exactly. Never simple. So simple it's not simple. Well, it's really good to see you. And I look forward to
Zachary.
continuing evolving on our journey, all of us. Grateful to be on the path with you. Big time.
Same brother. Thank you
You
so
already
much.
know, of course.
You drank me up and I found myself on the wrong side of war. And now the stars are upside down. Forgive me for myself, for breaking from the stream. Feeling taller now that I am on my knees. You got me speaking. Got me speaking in tongues for your love, for your love. You got me speaking in tongues for your love, for your love. You got me speaking. You got me speaking. You got me speaking in tongues for your love, for your love. You got me speaking in tongues for your love. To me like a chord and lift me up with your sound. My body eternally yours as you sing through my voice now. You got me speaking.